I still remember the sound of water falling that cold morning in Seoul. Steam filled the bathroom like a thick white curtain, rising in slow spirals to the ceiling, condensing on the white ceramic walls, and forming small drops that dripped like silent tears. My son's laughter echoed against the walls, pure, crystalline, innocent, like a small ray of sunshine piercing through the thick morning mist. I was drying his brown hair with the soft cotton towel, feeling the moist warmth of his skin against my hands, the gentle scent of the chamomile shampoo I always used on him, when a phrase came out of his mouth with the most devastating innocence in the world. "Mommy, Daddy hides money in the lady's car." For a second, just 1 second frozen in time, where everything stopped as if the universe had pressed the pause button, I thought I had heard wrong. My entire body stopped. My breathing caught halfway. My fingers froze in his hair, but his voice came again, calm, natural, without any weight, as if he were telling me about some cartoon he had watched on television. "You know, that pretty lady from his work, the one with the sweet perfume who comes to pick him up sometimes. I saw it when we passed through the parking lot the other day." In that instant, the entire world collapsed in slow motion. The sound of the shower water, which had been comforting before, became a distant and muffled noise, as if I were underwater, drowning in silence. My heart began to beat so hard, so fast, so desperately, that it seemed to want to tear through my chest and flee from there, flee from that reality being revealed through the innocent words of a 5-year-old child. I felt the cold ceramic floor beneath my bare feet, so cold, it seemed to burn. I felt the smell of lavender soap mixed with the humid steam of the bath, that smell that always calmed me but at that moment only intensified my growing nausea. And I felt that strange, inexplicable sensation, as if the air had become heavier, denser, harder to breathe, as if someone had placed an invisible weight on my chest. That ordinary winter morning in Seoul, with fog covering the bathroom windows and the distant sound of morning traffic below, horns, brakes, the incomprehensible announcement of some street vendor, the world I thought I knew collapsed silently, not with a bang, not with an explosion, but like snow falling on a sleeping city, covering everything with a cold and suffocating white, transforming the familiar landscape into something unrecognizable. Before I continue this story, I need to ask you something, and it's sincere. It comes from the bottom of my heart, from that place where words form when the pain is so great it needs to be shared. If you've been through something similar, if you understand this pain of discovering that everything was a lie, that the life you built was made of sand and illusion, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because I want more people to know they're not alone in this pain that suffocates, that paralyzes, that feels like it will last forever, that we can feel completely broken inside, shattered into 1,000 impossible to reassemble fragments, but still find the strength to start over. So stay with me until the end, because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about rebirth. It's about discovering that you are much stronger than you ever imagined. To fully understand how I arrived at that devastating moment in the bathroom, I need to go back in time. I need to tell how it all began, when I still believed in happy endings and eternal promises. I met Junho at a spring party in 2016, at a mutual friend's house in the Itaewon neighborhood. I was 24 years old, had just graduated with a degree in graphic design from university, and was in that phase of life where everything seems possible, where the future is a blank canvas waiting to be painted with vibrant colors and unlimited dreams. He was 27, worked as a financial analyst at a large company in Gangnam, and had that air of solid stability that, at the time, seemed extremely attractive and comforting to me. I remember the first moment our eyes met across the crowded room of people laughing, talking, dancing. He was near the large window overlooking the lit street, holding a glass of soju with ice, talking with some of his friends who were gesturing animatedly. He wore a light blue shirt, with the sleeves carefully rolled up to his elbows, dark jeans that fell perfectly, and had an easy and natural smile that lit up his entire face when he laughed at his friends' jokes. When he saw me from across the room, he stopped mid-conversation, literally stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence, and simply looked, for 3, 4, 5 seconds that seemed to last an eternity, suspended in time. Then he crossed the room with determination, politely excusing himself through the people in his way, lightly touching shoulders, murmuring, "Excuse me," several times, until he stopped right in front of me. "Hi," was all he said initially, with that half-shy, half-confident smile that I later discovered was so characteristic of him. "I'm Junho. and you are definitely the most interesting person at this entire party." It was a cliched line. I knew that even at that moment. But there was something in the way he said it, with genuine sincerity in his eyes, not as a calculated conquest tactic, that made me smile back involuntarily. "Minji," I said, extending my hand in a somewhat formal, somewhat playful manner. "And how can you know I'm interesting if we haven't even talked for 5 seconds?" He took my hand, but didn't shake it conventionally, just held it gently, that kind of touch that is respectful, yet intimate at the same time. "Intuition," he replied with that smile growing. "And also, because you have a book on the table next to you, while literally everyone here is busy taking selfies and posting stories." It was true. I had brought a book, a strange habit I had developed at parties, a kind of social anchor for when I felt uncomfortable or bored with superficial conversations, and he had noticed that small but significant detail, that in that moment full of music and voices, seemed incredibly significant. It seemed like a sign. It seemed like destiny. We talked the entire night, completely forgetting about the other people at the party, about books we loved and ones that disappointed us, about career dreams and fears of failing, about Seoul and how the city constantly changes but remains essentially the same in its essence, about our families. He casually mentioned that he had lost his mother young to a serious health condition, and I shared about having lost mine too when I was 15. And there was a moment of respectful and understanding silence, where we understood that we shared this specific and formative pain that marks you forever. About work, about loyal and false friends, about that kind of deep philosophy mixed with light nonsense that you can only discuss when you're slightly drunk on soju and completely comfortable with someone. When the party finally ended, it was already past 3 a.m. Most of the guests had left. Only a few remained, talking quietly in corners or sleeping on the couch. He offered me a ride. "I live in Mapo-gu. It's practically on the way to your place in Hongdae. It doesn't make sense for you to take a taxi." And I accepted without hesitation, something I normally would never, absolutely never do with someone I had just met a few hours before. But there was something about him, something in the way he looked at me, how he really listened when I spoke, that made me feel inexplicably safe. In his car, a dark gray sedan always impeccably clean, with the radio playing an old and melancholic Korean ballad that my mother used to sing, he asked while driving through the deserted streets of Seoul, "Can I see you again? Not at a party full of people, but at a quiet dinner? Or coffee? Or a walk in the park? Or literally anything you want to do?" And I, without hesitating even 1 second, without playing that game of, "I'll think about it," or maybe, said yes, with a huge smile on my face. Our first official date was at a small hidden cafe in Samcheong-dong on a rainy April afternoon where the sky was gray and the streets gleamed wet. The kind of hidden place that only locals know, without flashy signs, with green plants hanging from the ceiling creating a kind of living roof, exposed brick walls full of charming little imperfections, and the best caramel latte I had ever tasted in my life. We talked for 4 hours that felt like 40 minutes. Then we visited a nearby contemporary art gallery, where we stood in front of an abstract painting for 20 minutes, each interpreting it completely differently. Then we walked through the wet streets with no specific destination, sharing a striped umbrella, our shoulders touching with each synchronized step, our laughter echoing in the narrow alleys. When he took me home that night, at the door of my small studio on the 3rd floor of an old building, he didn't try to kiss me hastily like most men would have tried. He just held my hand for a long moment, looked directly and intensely into my eyes in a way that made me feel completely seen, and said with touching sincerity, "Thank you for today. It was absolutely perfect. You are exactly the kind of person I hoped to find, but thought didn't exist." And it was. It really was perfect. Like those days you want to keep in a box and preserve forever. The following months were that kind of intense and involving romance that you see in Korean dramas and usually think is exaggerated and unreal, but that happens in real life and is even more intense and overwhelming than any script could capture. Frequent meetings at hidden cafes that became our places. Long and unhurried walks along the Han River at sunset, when the sky was painted in oranges and pinks. Text messages at 3 a.m. just to say, "I'm thinking about you and can't sleep," followed by conversations that lasted until dawn. Video calls that extended for hours about absolutely nothing important and everything significant at the same time. He showing me what he was cooking for dinner, me showing the design project I was working on, philosophical conversations about the meaning of life mixed with inside jokes that only we understood. He took me to small and authentic restaurants he discovered in his exploratory wanderings around the city, places with no tourists, just local residents eating homemade food at cramped tables and talking loudly. He introduced me to his favorite Galbi restaurant in Mapo, where the owner knew him by name and always saved the best table near the window. He took me to see the spectacular fireworks at the Hangang Festival, where we lay on a blanket on the lawn watching the sky explode in colors. He patiently taught me how to make kimbap in the cramped kitchen of his apartment on a rainy Saturday, where we did nothing but cook and talk, and we laughed so much when everything completely fell apart that we ended up ordering fried chicken delivery and eating straight from the box while watching bad movies. I progressively met his friends, an eclectic and fun group of people from college and work, who obviously adored and deeply respected him. They immediately accepted me into the group, making me feel part of something bigger. I met his father on a formal Sunday afternoon, a tall and serious but fundamentally kind man who worked as a university professor of classical literature. He asked difficult questions about my career plans, my family, my values, looking into my eyes penetratingly as if he could read my soul. When I left his house that afternoon, nervous and sweating, Junho told me in the car, "My father really liked you." I could tell. He's never so talkative and engaged with the girlfriends he's met over the years. You're different, special. I felt chosen, validated, as if among all the millions of women in Seoul, this incredible man had specifically chosen me. He met my father on a tense and important September evening. My father was naturally protective, especially after having lost my mother so young and having only me as remaining close family. He asked all the difficult and direct questions that fathers ask, about job stability, about concrete future plans, about serious intentions with his daughter. Junho answered everything with impressive patience and apparent sincerity, looking my father in the eyes, speaking with respect but also with confidence. At the end of the evening, when Junho briefly stepped out to take an urgent work call, my father turned to me with an expression I rarely saw: approval. "This is a good man, Minji. Stable, respectful. Treat him well." I found it curious at the time that he said, "Treat him well," and not "I hope he treats you well," as would be more conventional, as if he could already see, with that wisdom that fathers sometimes have, that I would be the one more emotionally invested in the relationship, the one who would give more, the one who would sacrifice more. After 8 intense months of dating, Junho proposed to me. It wasn't anything elaborate or extravagant like those viral proposals you see online. It wasn't his style, and honestly wasn't mine either. It was on an absolutely ordinary Tuesday night, at his apartment that already felt kind of like mine too, after we had eaten spicy instant noodles straight from the pot and watched a bad and generic action movie on cable TV. During the final credits that no one normally watches, he simply grabbed the remote control and turned off the television, creating a sudden silence, turned completely toward me on the worn sofa, and said without preamble, "Marry me." I laughed nervously, thinking it must be some kind of joke or continuation of some inside joke I had forgotten. What? What are you talking about?" He didn't laugh. His face was completely serious, vulnerable, hopeful. "Marry me, Minji," he repeated with more emphasis, this time taking out a small, dark blue velvet box from his sweatpants pocket. "I know we haven't been together very long. I know everyone would probably say I should wait longer, do something more romantic and elaborate, plan better. But when you know, you just know. And I know with absolute certainty that I want to spend the rest of my entire life by your side. I want to wake up looking at your face every day for the next 50 years. I want to grow old with you and get gray and wrinkled together. I want to build a family. I want to be your partner in everything. So, please, marry me?" Tears streamed down my face before I could even fully process the words I had just heard. "Yes," I said, my voice coming out in an emotional and trembling whisper. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times. Yes, of course, yes." The ring was simple, but perfect. A delicate solitaire in white gold. Small, but brilliant diamond. Nothing ostentatious or exaggerated. Exactly my style, and showing that he really knew me. When he carefully placed it on my left ring finger, I looked at that small diamond capturing and reflecting the room's light, and thought with unshakable certainty, this is my life now. This is my love story forever. This is the man I'm going to grow old with. How tragically wrong I was. How I had no idea what was coming. We got married 6 months later in a small and intimate ceremony in a beautiful garden in Gangnam on a sunny spring Saturday. Just close family and truly dear friends. About 50 people total. None of those huge and impersonal weddings with hundreds of guests we barely know. I wore a simple but elegant dress I bought at a charming boutique in Garosugil, with delicate French lace on the sleeves and a short train that dragged slightly on the ground. He wore a perfectly tailored dark gray suit that made him look like he had stepped straight out of a men's fashion magazine. When I slowly walked down the improvised aisle between the white chairs decorated with satin ribbons, with my father leading me with careful steps and tears already completely blurring my vision, I saw Junho waiting at the improvised altar under an arch of white and green flowers. And he was crying openly, genuine tears streaming down his face without any attempt to hide or wipe them, without toxic masculine shame, just pure emotion. When I finally got close to him and my father symbolically placed my hand in his, Junho whispered just for me to hear. His voice choked. "You're so beautiful it hurts to look. I'm the luckiest man who ever existed on this planet." We said our traditional vows in Korean, the ancient and formal words that millions of couples said before us. But we also added personal vows that we wrote separately without the other knowing. He promised to make me laugh at least once every day, even on difficult days, to unconditionally support me in all my professional dreams and ambitions, to be my best friend beyond husband, never to go to bed without resolving conflicts. I promised to be his most trusted confidant, his biggest supporter, his safe home where he could always be vulnerable, to love his family as my own. In joy and in sorrow, we said together, our voices mixing, in wealth and in poverty, in health and in challenging illness, until death finally parts us. Promises that, in that moment, bathed in spring sunshine, seemed absolutely sacred and unbreakable, like oaths carved in stone. The party was genuinely perfect. Delicious traditional Korean food prepared by his aunt who was a chef, live music from a string quartet, embarrassing but joyful dances from older relatives. I saw my father, normally so serious and reserved, dancing animatedly with Junho's older aunt, both laughing like carefree teenagers. I saw his friends making embarrassing but genuinely hilarious speeches about idiotic college escapades. I saw my best friend Soo-jin crying copiously with happiness during her emotional toast, saying she always knew I would find someone special. When the long and perfect day finally ended, and we were alone in the car going to the boutique hotel where we would spend our first night as officially husband and wife, Junho took my tired hand and brought it to his lips, kissing each finger softly. "Done," he said with that smile that made me melt. "You're mine now, forever and always." And I, naive and completely hopelessly in love, believed it with every cell of my body. The first 2 years of marriage were genuinely good. Not perfect. No real marriage is perfect despite what Instagram tries to show, but truly good. We moved together to a larger 2-bedroom apartment in Mapo-gu, 10th floor, with that partial but beautiful view of the Han River I mentioned. We spent entire weekends carefully decorating, choosing furniture that reflected our mixed tastes, passionately discussing wall colors as if it were a life or death matter. I wanted sunny yellow in the kitchen to give energy. He thought it too flashy, and preferred something more neutral. We reached a democratic compromise with warm beige that left both satisfied, that kind of small and normal negotiation that couples constantly do, learning to yield and find middle ground. We established comfortable routines that gave structure to our days. He religiously woke up at 6:30 every morning, went to the building gym for exactly 40 minutes, came back sweaty and energized to take a long shower and get ready. I woke up at 7, went straight to the kitchen in pajamas to prepare strong coffee and toast while he got ready, and we had them together before he left precisely at 7:15 for work in Gangnam. I worked mainly from home, doing graphic design freelance for various small companies and startups, so my schedule was infinitely more flexible and self-determined. We had dinner together whenever possible, which at first was almost every night. We watched Korean and American series on TV, each comfortably settled in our favorite corner of the gray sofa, our bare feet touching and intertwining in the middle in casual intimacy. On weekends, we enthusiastically explored new restaurants we found on food blogs or revisited established favorites. We went to the movies to see Korean blockbusters. We visited colorful and noisy traditional markets in different neighborhoods. We did all those normal, everyday comforting things that normal and happy couples do. But looking back now with eyes opened by pain and distance, with the cruel clarity that only suffering and time can bring, I see with perfect clarity the signs I completely ignored, the small cracks that appear in the foundation before the complete and spectacular collapse. He progressively started working until later, first once a week, important meeting that ran long, sorry love, then twice, then 3 times. Eventually 4 or 5 nights a week he only arrived after 10 at night. It's temporary, he always guaranteed, kissing my forehead almost automatically before leaving very early. This project will end soon, and everything goes back to normal. But there was always another project, always another impossible deadline, always another convincing and reasonable excuse not to be home, not to be present. Our conversations progressively and noticeably became more superficial. Before we talked literally about everything, our deepest and most irrational fears, our most ambitious and secret dreams, our personal philosophies about life and happiness. After, we only talked about bills that needed to be paid, about commitments that needed to be coordinated, about whether there was enough milk in the refrigerator, purely logistical and transactional conversations that unknown apartment roommates would have, not a supposedly in-love couple. We stopped having intimate relations with the frequency we used to at the beginning. From 3 or 4 times a week with genuine enthusiasm, it gradually went to once a week mechanically, then once every 2 weeks without real passion, then only occasionally when I initiated with hope. And even then he seemed distracted and distant, as if he were just fulfilling an unpleasant but necessary conjugal obligation. "I'm exhausted from work," was the excuse constantly repeated like a mantra. "I really don't have energy for anything." And I, desperately wanting to be the understanding and perfect wife, the wife who doesn't complain or make drama, the wife who unconditionally supports, simply accepted everything without seriously questioning. I swallowed my growing frustration and my increasingly deep loneliness, put a forced but convincing smile on my face, and said with a sweet voice, "It's okay, love. I completely understand. Rest." When I unexpectedly got pregnant almost 2 years after the wedding, I naively thought things would magically improve, that a baby would bring us back together emotionally, would remind us of the love we had, of what we built. When I told him, I held the positive pregnancy test with my hands literally trembling with mixed nervousness and excitement, my heart beating violently accelerated. He smiled, but it was a strange and difficult to interpret smile. A smile that didn't completely reach his eyes, that seemed more social reflex than genuine joy. "Wow," was all he could initially say, staring fixedly at the test as if it were an alien object. Wow. Wasn't expecting this. Uncomfortable silence for long seconds. "Are you happy?" I asked directly, desperately needing to hear the right words. "Of course I am," he responded automatically, pulling me into a hug. But the hug was rigid and mechanical, without the warmth it used to have. "It's just unexpected and kind of scary, you know? But it's good news. Definitely great news. It should have been a moment of pure and ecstatic celebration, but there was something indefinable in his reaction that left me deeply uneasy and insecure. But I consciously pushed the uncomfortable feeling down, convinced myself it was just my hormones already starting to change, completely normal anxiety of a future father facing enormous responsibility. The pregnancy was objectively difficult and challenging, terrible and constant morning sickness in the first 4 months that left me unable to work adequately, intense back pains in the last 3 months that made sleeping almost impossible, swelling in my feet that made walking painful, and he was increasingly less present physically and emotionally. He worked even later, frequently arriving after midnight. He traveled for work with increasing frequency: Busan, Daegu, Gwangju, sometimes even Tokyo or Shanghai. He called to ask how I was doing, but the conversations were invariably short and rushed. "Need to urgently get back to meeting," was how they practically always ended abruptly. I went alone to the overwhelming majority of prenatal appointments. I sat in the waiting room seeing other pregnant women with their attentive husbands, lovingly holding their hands, looking together fascinated at the grainy ultrasounds, asking questions to the doctor, and I was completely alone, holding my own hand, listening alone to the rapid heartbeats of our son, receiving alone the important medical advice. When Taeyang was finally born on a dramatic and rainy October night after 14 brutal hours of labor, Junho almost completely missed the birth. He was in Busan supposedly closing a critically important deal. I called him in panic when the contractions seriously started. It was 3 in the afternoon. "I'm coming right now," he said with urgency in his voice. leaving here now. But Busan is more than 2 hours from Seoul under normal conditions, even more with traffic, and babies definitely don't wait for the father's convenience. Soo-jin, my loyal and wonderful friend, rushed me to the hospital, held my sweaty hand during the 14 interminable hours of progressively more painful labor, encouraged me, and gave me strength when I cried, saying I couldn't anymore. And when Taeyang finally emerged into the world with that loud and indignant cry that announces new and miraculous life, when the nurse placed that small, wet, and perfect human being on my chest for the first time, I looked at that tiny and red little face and thought two contradictory but equally true things simultaneously. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anything in the universe. And immediately after, where the hell is your father? Junho arrived 45 minutes after the birth, with his suit completely wrinkled and sweaty, crooked tie, panting breath from having literally run through the hospital's labyrinthine corridors. Did I miss it? Did I miss everything? He asked, with what seemed to be genuine panic and regret on his flushed face. Not completely, I said, my voice coming out infinitely colder and more controlled than I felt inside. He was born just half an hour ago. You only missed the actual birth of your only son. Just that. The bitter sarcasm was impossible to hide. He mechanically did all the right things after that, held the baby with excessive and reverent care, as if it were made of glass, cried looking at that tiny little face, said repeatedly that he was terribly sorry for not arriving in time. But something fundamental inside me had already irreversibly changed at that moment. A deep crack had formed in the foundation, small perhaps but impossible to ignore. The first chaotic months with a newborn who won't stop crying are notoriously brutal for any new parent, but especially when you're essentially doing absolutely everything alone without real help. Junho returned to work after just one scarce week of paternity leave. The company really needs me. It's a critical period, he explained apologetically but firmly. And I was completely alone with a baby who didn't sleep more than 2 hours straight, constantly sore and leaking breasts from breastfeeding, body still painfully recovering from the trauma of childbirth, hormones in complete emotional chaos making me cry over anything. I never slept adequately. I didn't eat properly or regularly. I barely had time to take a decent shower. I wore the same clothes with visible milk stains for 3 days straight because, honestly, who cares? Who's seeing? Just me and the baby, day after interminable day, night after exhausting night, in the apartment that seemed increasingly smaller and more suffocating. Junho invariably came home tired from work and expected me to automatically understand and not ask for anything. And I understood rationally. He worked long hours in a stressful environment. But who understood my tiredness that was different but equally valid? Who validated my physical and mental exhaustion? At least you can stay home and don't have to deal with a boss, he casually commented once, with absolutely no intentional malice, just as a factual observation, as if staying home 24 hours a day with a baby who won't stop crying was relaxing spa vacation. Gradually, imperceptibly, in Taeyang's formative first years, Junho became increasingly absent emotionally and physically. Not always physically. He technically slept in the apartment most nights, had breakfast with us hurriedly, sometimes played with the baby for 10 minutes before sleeping. But emotionally, psychologically, he was somewhere completely different. Another planet, another dimension. I tried to talk seriously about this in the rare moments we had alone. I feel like you're not really present even when you're physically here, I said one night after finally managing to put Taeyang to sleep after an hour of crying. It seems like your mind is always somewhere else, thinking about other things. He didn't even divert his eyes from the bright screen of the cell phone he was holding. I'm just very stressed with work lately, he responded on autopilot. You really don't understand the absurd pressure I'm constantly under. And that was invariably the standard response to everything. Work. Always stressful work. As if that were an impenetrable shield against any criticism, any emotional need, any request for real presence and engagement. I once asked, gathering significant courage, if he wanted to consider doing couples therapy to improve our communication. He laughed out loud without humor, not in a cruel or malicious way, but as if the idea were completely absurd. We're not dramatic Americans, he said with slight disdain. We don't need a paid therapist to resolve completely normal marriage problems. We just need time and patience. Things will naturally improve when Taeyang grows more and you're not so constantly tired and irritated. As if the fundamental problem was me being legitimately tired. as if the problem wasn't him having completely emotionally disappeared from our marriage, so I simply stopped asking for anything. I stopped complaining or expressing needs. I stopped verbalizing growing frustrations. I became the perfectly silent wife who just functions efficiently, who keeps the house running impeccably, who raises the child alone, who smiles automatically when she needs to smile socially, and cries completely hidden in the shower when she can't hold it anymore. And in this suffocating and heavy silence, in this deep loneliness within the marriage that is ironically worse than any physical loneliness of actually being alone, the years flew by. Taeyang grew rapidly. He started walking wobbly, speaking recognizable words, going to daycare, and then school. Junho continued working his mysterious long hours, arriving increasingly late. I continued existing on emotional autopilot, just surviving day after day, until that fateful morning in the bathroom finally, until that innocent and devastating phrase that completely destroyed the elaborate castle of cards I had meticulously built in my mind. And now you perfectly understand why it hurt so deeply? Because it wasn't simply the sexual betrayal itself. It was the painful validation of something I already knew deep down for a long time, but stubbornly refused to consciously admit. I had already lost my husband emotionally years ago. The other woman just made it impossible to continue ignoring and denying. After finding the revealing envelope in the cold parking lot, I spent days in complete discreet investigation mode. I silently checked his phone when he was in the long shower, but the password had mysteriously changed. It had never been a protected secret before. I meticulously searched for suspicious receipts in all the clothes pockets before washing. I paid obsessive attention to every word he said, every facial micro-expression, every small lie that accumulated, and I progressively found more things. Of course I found. When you finally know where and how to look, the evidence is literally everywhere screaming. Crumpled receipts from expensive and romantic restaurants in Itaewon that he definitely never took me to in 7 years. Detailed charge on the credit card from a rest hotel near his office. 3 hours on a random Tuesday when he should have been in important meetings all day. Messages supposedly deleted, but still recoverable on the old iPad he rarely used and forgot automatically synced with the iPhone. Can barely wait to see you and touch you today. 6 p.m. at the usual place as we arranged, said one message from her. Yesterday was absolutely incredible and unforgettable. I can still feel you inside me. He responded without any apparent remorse. And the worst of all that made me physically vomit. Do you think she suspects anything? She asked with concern. No, she has no idea about anything. She continues completely in her illusion. He responded with a casual cruelty that broke me. That last specific message was a completely different and more painful stab than all the others. She. I had been cruelly reduced to an impersonal and distant pronoun. Not even my proper name. Just she. The irritating inconvenience. The physical obstacle in the way. The wife who was hindering their great true love. I methodically copied absolutely everything. Detailed screenshots. Photos as backup. I saved everything in a hidden and password-protected folder in the cloud. Irrefutable and unquestionable evidence. 2 dense weeks after the devastating initial discovery, I finally confronted him. I didn't plan ahead. I wasn't psychologically prepared. It just happened explosively. It was a perfectly normal Thursday night. Taeyang was sleeping deeply in his little room. Junho was relaxed on the sofa watching boring television, cold beer in his right hand. Perfect image of the ordinary husband deservedly relaxing after a long day of honest work. Something deep inside me simply broke irreparably. Maybe it was the absurdly false normalcy of the domestic scene. Maybe it was the casual way he was sitting there as if he hadn't methodically destroyed everything. I got up, walked to the television, and turned it off abruptly. He looked genuinely surprised and confused. What's wrong? I was watching that. We need to talk now, I said, with a trembling but determined voice. About Park Ji-hye. I saw exactly when her name came out of my mouth. I saw the involuntary and revealing physical reaction, entire body becoming visibly tense, eyes widening for a revealing fraction of a second before consciously recomposing himself. Hands squeezing the beer can with excessive and unnecessary force, crushing the thin aluminum and making noise. What exactly about her? Desperately trying to sound casual and innocent, failing miserably and obviously. Don't insult me by pretending you don't know perfectly well what I'm talking about. My voice came out surprisingly calmer and more controlled than I felt internally. I know absolutely everything. The hotel in Busan, the money hidden in her car, the explicit messages, everything. Silence. Long, heavy, absolutely suffocating. Then he tried the first tactic. Complete denial. I honestly don't know what you're talking about. Jihai is just a work colleague. This is ridiculous. I calmly picked up my cell phone, opened the organized folder of screenshots, and threw the device in his lap forcefully. Then explain to me in detail these messages, dear work colleague. I saw him scroll through the screen, his face becoming progressively and visibly paler with each message read. The evidence was completely irrefutable and unquestionable. First denial tactic had failed spectacularly. Second tactic, minimization and confusion. All this wipe isn't exactly what it seems to be. It's extremely complicated. You don't understand the complete context. No, I interrupted firmly, my voice finally breaking a bit emotionally. It's not minimally complicated. It's very simple, actually. You're having a secret relationship, for many months deliberately. You lied shamelessly to me literally every day, and now you're pathetically trying to convince me that the obvious reality isn't real. Third desperate tactic, blame the victim. Don't you really see? You became so completely distant after Taeyang was born. Always exhausted, always obsessively focused on him, never had time or energy for me. I felt invisible and irrelevant in my own house. And there it was revealed, the true face. Blame the wife for your own conscious betrayal. So it's literally my fault? My voice rose uncontrollably. Is it my fault that I gestated and painfully gave birth to your son? Is it my fault that I'm completely exhausted taking care of him practically alone while you claim to be working late but were actually sleeping with her? I'm not saying it's fault. It just partially explains the context. It explains absolutely nothing. I was screaming now without control, without caring if Taeyang would wake up scared. You made choices, completely conscious and deliberate choices. Every day for months on end. And now you want to put the moral responsibility on me? Fourth tactic, performative self-pity, tears sprouting. Genuine or carefully performative, honestly didn't matter anymore. I'm so sorry, so much, so deeply. I completely ruined everything we built. I don't know what came over me. I lost everything that really matters. You didn't passively lose anything, I said with an icy and cutting clarity. You consciously threw it away, deliberately and repeatedly. Fifth and last tactic, desperate bargaining. I'll end it with her today. Right now, this instant. I'll call her in front of you. I'll resign from my job if it's absolutely necessary. I'll do individual and couples therapy. Anything. Whatever you want. Just give me a single chance to fix everything. And this desperate proposal, ironically, was the most emotionally painful tactic, because a substantial part of me still so desperately wanted to believe in the possibility. I wanted it to be viable to go back to what we were, but the rational and awakened part knew the immutable truth. You can't really fix completely broken glass. You can try to carefully glue the pieces, but the cracks will always be eternally there, and I can't live the rest of my life constantly looking at the cracks, anxiously wondering when they'll catastrophically open again. Minji, please listen to me. I already contacted a specialized lawyer. I already officially initiated the legal divorce process. You'll officially receive the papers next week. The color drained instantly and completely from his face. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my entire life. He simply sat there, on the sofa we chose together years ago, holding my cell phone with all my accumulated evidence, looking like a man who just realized he lost absolutely everything important. And maybe, in that specific moment of clarity, he really finally realized. But it was too late. Much, much too late. The following months were a confusing blur of arid legal procedures, intense, uncontrolled emotions, and forced adaptation to the new divorced reality. Junho moved to a significantly smaller apartment in Uido just 2 weeks after the explosive confrontation. He agreed to pay generous child support for Taeyang without any resistance or negotiation. Maybe genuine guilt, maybe just wanting to end the painful process quickly. Taeyang, my impressive little boy of only 5 years, was understandably confused, but adapting surprisingly better than I feared. Is Daddy going to live permanently in another house now? He asked when I carefully explained with age-appropriate words. Yes, my love, but you'll visit him regularly. He's still your daddy and loves you immensely. And is Mommy also going to live in a different house? No, dear. We stay exactly here, our safe home. He thought seriously for a long moment, processing. So does that mean I'm going to have 2 different rooms? One here, and a new one at Daddy's house? The refreshing and pragmatic simplicity of the child's perspective. 2 rooms was genuinely exciting. The family falling apart was just neutral change. I finally started weekly therapy. I should have started years earlier, honestly. But cultural pride, persistent social stigma, and psychological denial prevented me. The therapist, Dr. Han, had a welcoming office in Itaewon. Kind woman of about 60 years, round-framed glasses, elegantly gray short hair, incredibly calm and non-judgmental presence. First session, I cried uncontrollably 45 of the 50 available minutes. "You absolutely don't need to apologize for crying here," she said gently, while passing the box of tissues for the 3rd time. Tears are important words that the body uses when the mouth can no longer articulate the suffering. Following sessions, we began to meticulously deconstruct, not just the failed marriage itself, but problematic patterns of my entire life. How I always automatically put others' needs consistently before my own. How I derived my own value from being useful and necessary. How I had a pathological fear of disappointing people, so I constantly molded myself to what they needed from me. "When was the last true time," she asked in a particularly intense February session, "that you did something purely for yourself, without minimally considering other people's needs or opinions?" I couldn't answer adequately. I literally didn't remember a single example. "That exactly," she said, pointing with her pen, "is the fundamental central problem. You completely lost yourself trying to be absolutely perfect for everyone around you, and when he cruelly betrayed you, it seemed like final definitive validation that you weren't good enough, would never be enough. But the liberating truth? You were always completely sufficient exactly as you are. He just wasn't minimally ready to genuinely value what he had that was precious." Those powerful words planted important seeds. It would take many more months still to really deeply internalize, but it was a crucial beginning. I began, very timidly at first, to do small things exclusively for myself. Small things first because big changes scared me. I enrolled in weekly ceramics class, something I always wanted to do but never had time. Every Tuesday evening, Soo-jin generously stayed with Taeyang, and I went to the welcoming studio in Hongdae. I felt the wet and cold clay in my hands for the first time. I patiently learned to center on the spinning wheel, form basic cylinders, pull delicate walls upward. My first pieces were complete disasters, crooked, cracked, spectacularly collapsing. But it genuinely didn't matter. It was my disaster, my imperfect creation but mine. I went back to reading voraciously for pure pleasure without guilt. I bought stacks of books that Junho would have inevitably called useless nonsense. Watery romances, modern poetry, popular fiction. I read without absolutely any productivist guilt. I significantly changed the apartment. Not drastically. I didn't have money for an expensive, complete renovation, but small visually and emotionally significant changes. I painted the main living room wall from boring beige to calming light blue. I bought green plants and really patiently learned to keep them alive this time. I reorganized all the furniture for better and more my flow. I removed absolutely all his photos from the walls and shelves. I reclaimed the space as exclusively my safe territory. Junho still religiously saw Taeyang every other alternating weekend. Exchanges were predictably tense, but we maintained basic civility. Minimal conversations strictly necessary about shared parenting of our son. He seemed visibly smaller in some indefinable way, not necessarily physically, but energetically and spiritually, as if he had wilted or diminished. I eventually found out through mutual friends we maintained that his relationship with Ji-hai ended messily, just a few months after our finalized divorce. Apparently, when it was no longer forbidden and secret, it completely lost its fascination and intensity. Or maybe she finally realized the obvious truth. A man who cruelly betrays his wife will inevitably betray the next partner too when the novelty passes. I felt no satisfaction or joy in that information. Just absolutely nothing. Complete indifference was infinitely better than consuming anger or destructive resentment. In beautiful April, several months after everything started crumbling, I was casually crossing the Mapo Bridge over the Han River on a perfect Saturday afternoon. Taeyang was with Junho on his weekend. I had the entire day completely free, a concept still strange, new, and wonderful. The sky was absolutely incredible. Perfect golden hour before sunset. Impressive colors magically reflecting in the dark river water. Vibrant oranges, soft pinks, luminous golds, gentle and soft spring breeze moving my newly cut hair, and suddenly, completely without expecting or planning, without any specific identifiable reason, I smiled, genuinely and deeply, not performatively for anyone, but an absolutely real smile that comes spontaneously from within, from some deep place that I honestly thought had permanently died in that cold parking lot. And I realized with crystalline clarity, I was genuinely happy, not despite everything that happened painfully, but precisely because it happened and forced me to change, because it forced me to completely break. It forced me to consciously rebuild. And in the careful reconstruction, for the first time in my life, I did everything consciously, actively choosing each piece I wanted to keep and courageously leaving behind definitively what no longer served me. I was no longer the naive Minji who met Junho at that party years ago. I was no longer the complacent wife who accepted crumbs of attention calling it love. I was someone completely new, more fundamentally strong, more deeply aware, more truly whole. Pain didn't kill me as I feared. It radically transformed me. And deep transformation, I finally clearly realized, was a disguised gift. Not that gift you ask for or desire, but precisely the one you most need to evolve. Today, when Taiyang occasionally asks about Daddy, and he asks less and less frequently, I always respond honestly, but gently. Sometimes adults grow in fundamentally different directions, and that's okay. True love isn't about forcing or trapping, it's about actively choosing every day. And when someone consciously stops choosing, you need to love yourself sufficiently to let go with dignity. He's still too young to completely understand all the nuances, but he'll understand eventually. And when he finally fully understands, I deeply hope he sees a courageous mother who finally chose herself, who firmly refused to accept less than she deserved, who modeled authentic strength, not destructive martyrdom. I learned painfully, but definitively, the greatest possible love isn't sacrificial and self-destroying. It's healthy and solid self-love, because only when you truly and deeply love yourself can you really love others in a healthy and sustainable way. A relationship that requires you to diminish, silence, or erase essential parts of yourself, it's definitely not real love. It's disguised emotional prison. And I finally completely freed myself. If you made it this far in this long story, if you patiently read every word, every description of pain, every step of transformation, I want to sincerely thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for witnessing my journey. Thank you for genuinely caring. If you're going through something painfully similar right now in this moment, if you're in that metaphorical cold parking lot holding your own envelope of devastating lies, if you're lying next to someone you don't recognize anymore, if you're anxiously wondering if you'll really manage to survive this, you will survive. I solemnly promise, you absolutely will. Not exactly the way you expect or imagine. Not without significant pain in the process. Not without deep fundamental changes in who you essentially are. But you will definitely survive. And more important than just surviving, you will eventually flourish again, even more beautifully. Maybe not immediate tomorrow, but inevitably. Winter always eventually ends. Always without exception. Spring always faithfully comes. And when it finally specifically comes for you, and it will inevitably come, you'll clearly realize you needed the rigorous winter to really appreciate spring. You needed the deep darkness to genuinely value the light. You are much stronger than you dare imagine, more resilient than you consciously know, more valuable than you were conditioned to believe, and you are sufficient, completely alone, without minimally needing external validation, without needing someone to complete you. Sufficient exactly as you are in this moment. So if this story resonated deeply, if you saw painful pieces of yourself reflected in it, leave a heart in the comments. Share generously with someone who needs to hear, and always firmly remember, your story doesn't end with who hurt you. It really begins when you finally decide to love yourself enough to courageously move forward. And that, my dear friend, is when true life finally begins.